Welcome back. This is Robin Mines. Before we went on the break, we're talking about the price of fame. And now let's talk about the economy and the impact that the proposed 15% tariff will be having. If we take a closer look at the federal government's proposed 15% tariff on imported fuel, this is a move that has sparked fresh debates about the cost of living, inflation, and Nigeria's energy future. Now, supporters say that the tariff could protect local refineries and encourage domestic production, especially as the country pushes for energy independence. But critics warn that it might actually drive up the fuel prices, worsen inflation, and hit transport, manufacturing, and everyday Nigerians hard. We're going to unpack what this means for the economy, the local refineries, and the average citizen. And the big question is this policy a step towards sustainability, or is just another burden on Nigerians already struggling with rising costs? To discuss this virtually with me is an economist, Gospel Obele. Welcome to the program.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. So let's get straight into it. We are in a situation whereby everybody is trying to make sure that the cost of living goes down. What is the implication of this new tariff on the economy?
Thank you very much for the question, and big thank you to Robbie Mines for the opportunity to be here again. It's interestingly, broadly, in context of how the world is evolving now, that tariffs have become an economic tool people now, or governments significantly now use to sort of gaining quote-unquote economic justice around trade. So governments are seeking to gain edges around what they want to trade on, what they want to allow in, at how much, at what price, and all of that. But then again, it's in itself a lovely economic tool to use to moderate things. But when you don't have the necessary structures available, in your local economy to scale, in this case now, the oil refining, or, have more refineries that are churning out oil production and all of that, it might be a bit counterproductive in context. Now, on one side of things, it's a brilliant, or simply to say considerate policy to have, because you're trying to grow local production, local refining of oil and all that. And many of the oil producers and the likes are constantly struggling, trying to find a local market that they can scale with, by virtue of the fact that there is a huge level of imported fuel products or end user products coming into the country. But on the flip side of things, if you don't have the necessary infrastructure, if you're unable to scale distribution, if you're unable to channel energy correctly into homes at ease, all right, placing or putting trade restrictive measures like increased tariffs, in this case now, might be counterproductive on the average Nigerian.
Yeah.
Whilst it's good to have policy, I think to a very large extent it could be counterproductive, particularly if it's not rolled out correctly, and particularly if we're not taking into consideration the increasing informal and demand side economy for end user.
Okay, let's talk about the practicality of things. Currently, there is only one local refinery that we know is churning out products. The NNPC has tried several years with billions of dollars being put into, reviving the refineries, and nothing has still happened till now. Dangote seems to be the only local player currently, and he has assured that there will be enough production to service the local demand. Now, do you think Dangote will be able to live up to that expectation? And also, what are your thoughts on people's perception of monopoly?
Yeah, fantastic question. I mean, Dangote himself has done a good job with setting up a refinery and trying to lead private sector effort in a space that has been long talked about, and a sector that has really required revamping and all that. But my own simple opinion, I do not think that the future of energy production, the future of meeting our home usage or domestic demand for oil wood should be hinged on one party only. I think that there is a whole lot more if the market is open for several other players to come in. Now, it might not necessarily mean everybody needs to set up refineries, but the big catch would now be, how do you ensure that you have more significant strategic players along the value chain to ensure that we are accurately meeting local demand. I do not think, as at the same time, that the Nigerian Oil Producer Association and stakeholders at that supply chain level have enough accurate data to estimate what local demand is. Take, for instance, the average home, in Nigeria currently consumes at least 25 liters of fuel per week. Think about that per week. And now, take into consideration that the average home, you could have an entrepreneur in that home, you could have normal household, and so if you trickle the impact of what an average home may be spending in terms of multiply effect consumption on fuel demand alone per week, it could be way much more than times 3 or times 4 of that 25 liters in the context. So I do not think that we've had enough data metrics to correctly measure or capture what the Nigerian demand for fuel consumption is. As such, I do not also, in all full sense, think that one single producer, would be able to meet local demand as much as that local or private sector effort is strategically required right now and requires a lot of support to scale.
Okay, so now with that, that is to say that Nigeria might need to import fuel. And with this 15% tariff now, the importers have cried out that that could take the fuel price well above 1,000. And with what we've experienced last year / this year, the fuel prices have just been fluctuating. I think about 3 months ago, it was about 800 and something. Currently, at AP, it is 925. At other filling stations, you could also get it for 920. There are just several prices going on based on, the amount of money that they buy. So if this 15% tariff is implemented, importers are saying that it could take the fuel price above 1,000 naira, which will further cause inflation. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, there is no gainsaying about it. It's definitely going to impact the local economy in terms of prices of fuel. And I say that confidently from two streams. Number one, the fact that we don't even know what local demand is in quote. So it's way much more than what we can supply, what Dangote can supply in the real sense of things. So now putting a tariff on that will impact on, imported fuel, which would mean shortage or likely scarcity or artificial scarcity, of that. So meaning those who even have it might want to hold it so that they can sell at a higher price much later. So the natural order of tariff impact on imported goods will kick in, which is increased prices. All right. And businesses will suffer it, households will suffer it. And Nigeria has not really done a good job when it comes to cushioning the impact of such policies. We roll out the policies first before we think of cushioning the impact. We need to create the structures to manage the impact before you roll out policies. On the second leg of things, aside the natural order of price increase and penetration into the economy, it's also the artificial order. The Nigerian economy significantly is a human behavior thing. We're a largely speculative economy. All right, we're largely speculative consumers and speculative producers. And that's because you don't have a strong strategic regulatory policy of pricing in place. So what happens is people who currently have the product, who are not actually importing the product at the time of the increase in tariff, will hold on to the product so that when prices begin to increase, they can then gain the market by selling at a higher price for product they already have. All right. So there's also a third level. Those who might not know exactly how the market will respond, how the market will evolve, how the value chain players will respond, will further hold it to see what will happen in the future. So there could be layers of artificial scarcity in code. Not necessarily that fuel won't be available. It will be available at different prices and at different points in times and at different consumer touch points. And that's what really happens. So you're dealing with the blend of yes, a good quote unquote a good economic policy when you think about it from an intention standpoint, but it could be I strongly think that it could be it's going to be incorrectly or inaccurately rolled out, and that could then impact roller coaster when it comes to natural order of pricing, first level artificial order of pricing, and second level artificial order of pricing. And when that happens, what does that mean? It means the basket of tomato that is constantly changing will keep changing. It means that the price of bread will change. It means that the price of egg might go up. It means that the cost of transportation, and do not forget this, if you look at the construct of the Nigerian inflation numbers, particularly where the inflationary pressure kicks in the most, it's on the basic necessities, housing, transportation, food, and all of that. And these are strong levelers that are strongly dependent on energy, our current energy structure. And I've always held a position in the last 5 years from my work as an economist in order to say that if 50% of our power challenges are fixed, Nigerians will depend less on fuel. So the reason why we have an increased dependency on fuel is because we have strong, serious power problems. So if you solve the power problems by 50% now, because I don't think can be solved 100% time soon. If you solve it by 50% at least, it means that there will be a significant drop in demand for fuel. And when you begin to look at it from that context, we're able to measure up and manage the dynamics of and international engagement and even local refinery when it comes to impact on prices.
All right. Yeah, now, a lot of people would say that without this 15% tariff, that the imported fuel will be cheaper than the locally refined fuel, you know, the Dangote refinery, that Dangote doesn't stand a chance. Now, for the end consumer would always want to have cheaper price, you know, because then the inflation goes down and the economy is running better. But in long term, it doesn't do the country well. So what do you make of first of all, why would imported fuel be cheaper than what we locally refine here? And what do you make of what's the long-term impact if we're having cheaper imported fuel as opposed to, you know, consuming the locally produced products?
So there are many reasons why the locally produced products are expensive. Just like saying why is a basket of tomato expensive when we produce a lot of it. There are many value chain reasons why, there are policy reasons why, there are regulatory reasons, there are supply chain, very deeper reasons that time will not give us the opportunity to go into now. But to focus very much closely on the economics of the now and the future, I strongly believe and I think that introducing policies to cut down on imported products is the way forward. So in that context, in the context of introducing policies to support local content, in quotes, in this case now, is actually the way forward. But then it only can succeed, which is where there's some of mismatch here. It only can succeed if you have the right infrastructure, the right regulatory practices, the right standardization and governance of the sector in place. And secondly, we're closing the gap between between raw material generation, processing, and and ensuring that there's availability in quantity and quality of the finished product that needs to get to the consumer. All right. So until we can build around those local economics effectively and efficiently for a long period of time, we might not be able to significantly compete with imported. So what we're trying to do is to fix that without having to fix the structural enablers around this local content. It's a good policy, by the way, but it's just the way in which it's been deployed. We're trying to reach 100 without starting from point 1 or point 10.
Yeah. What do you make of the timing? What do you make of the timing? Because we are currently in a period where our economy seems like it's recovering. I mean, the dollar went from 1,900, now it's about 1,400 plus, significantly because of the local production that's began to happen with the Dangote refinery. With Trump's tweets about what's happening in the north, the Nigerian stock market lost trillions of naira. And now if we have this 15% tariff and then for some reason the inflation goes up, what do you think will happen to our economy, based on the timing of everything happening all at once and where we are currently and even Nigeria's international image currently? What do you make of the timing?
I mean, to start with, whilst I think the policy is not too bad, like I mentioned, it's how it's been rolled out that's the main issue. I think the timing is a bit of a sensitive one, and in all honesty, might not necessarily be the best of times to roll out such policy, in as much as the policies is really required and really important right now in the Nigerian economy and our national history. So it's a good time, but it's also a bad time, so to say. Now, it's a bad time because of the many reasons you outlined. But much more important is the fact that if you think about what Trump had done the last 1 year, it's been the use of tariffs as economic weaponry, as economic weapon to establish dominance and all that. And these are the times we live in. We live in times where geopolitics now intersects with geoeconomics. And when he rolled out those tariffs he rolled out last year, what we realized that the global order of trade began to shift, and then nations started putting more restrictions on who they want to trade with and who would be on the side of the quote unquote geopolitical divide. So now that hasn't completely fizzled out, and now with a lot of pressure and focus on the north and the Nigerian economy in its entirety, I do not think it's really the best of times, because again, many of these countries you're importing from have trade policies. You don't want them to put up restrictions that may be a bit, So again, whilst the policy is important for Nigeria, it's now a timing issue. I think it's the best of timing. I think we could have done more in terms of phasing the delivery or the introduction of that policy.
Yes. So finally, what role should regulation play to ensure competition, and, let's not have monopoly or artificial scarcity? What role should regulation play here?
Well, there's the ideal case of what regulation should do. But in many emerging and developing markets, it's not usually the case because, the order of how the regulatory system is set up itself is slightly dysfunctioned, and in its nature of dysfunctionality, you can't necessarily govern or set the price or manage market behavior or determine market outcomes in itself. Hence why these policies tend to impact on the consumer really fast, because there are no regulatory mechanisms that are cushioning the effect. But in the ideal case, the regulator should be eyes ball on the market globally, eyes ball on what it means for other trade partners if we increase tariff, what it means for our local refineries system, what it means for other players who might have the capacity to also play in the refinery space as private sector to also support more players. I don't think it should be a monopoly market, in as much as we need to support private sector players who are already in there, like Dangote, or who are already currently seeking to play in there. So it's a good policy, but I don't think, and also our regulatory system is not well, aside from structure, the competence, the cultural competence to manage the complexity of the Nigerian economy and how prices easily trickle down on consumers. I don't really think that we have the capacity. So there's a lot of capacity building, there's a lot of governance, enablement and capacity building in that context. And it's also a lot of watchdogging and paying attention to what's happening globally, and even some form of lobbying. How do you lobby with nations that you used to import from? What does that mean for your trade relations? What does that mean in the growing context of the geopolitical crisis and geoeconomic instability and all of that? What does that mean in the larger scheme of things? The regulatory practices should be informing or advising the executive, government, and council a bit more closely on what the policy. Hence why I think that policies like that, in as much as they're important and necessary, should be trickled down in terms of stages of delivery, stages of impact, the stages of how they're introduced into the economy. How do we manage the excesses? The fact that we don't have the structural enablers, to cater for the common man who would feel the brunt the most, the MSM who will feel the brunt the most. All right, how do we manage them in the face of this policy that is really crucial to support local refinery? How do we begin to invest in local refinery production? How do we incentivize more private sector to go in? So these are the big questions. Regulation, but capacity is a big issue.
Gospel, I know there's so much to say on this particular topic, and so it seems like you're a bit on the divide in the sense that it's a good policy, but also you do not trust how it is being rolled out and the impact.
Yeah, which is where the challenge is.
I get it. But we can only wish for the best, and of course, the people that are making these policies are currently watching. Thank you so much for coming on to the program, Gospel, and we wish you the very best. All right, Robbie Mind continues. When we come back, we'll be having a celebrity interview, and I'll reveal my guest very soon. Stay with us.